The word legend, I think we use very loosely these days, but it is entirely appropriate when applied to our next panelist, Mr. Ruskin Bond, who we are very delighted to welcome back to the Kolkata Literary Meet. Sir, maybe have you up on stage, where he is going to be in conversation with Jayant Kripalani. The session is specially presented by Exide. Mr. Bond will be talking about reading and a child's imagination.
Afternoon, whatever it is, I forget. For a moment, I thought when she said legend, she was introducing me, but then I was, oh well, story of my life, what to do. Mr. Bond needs no introduction, and so I'm not going to make one, but he does have more than 150 titles to his credit. Am I right?
Perhaps that's what is making people call me a legend. I have no wish to be a legend just yet. Legends are usually spoken about sometime after their demise. And I'd rather put it off for some time, actually. But yes, over 100 titles, but a lot of them are children's books, which are not very long. So I can't say I had to work too hard on them. But yes, well, if you've been writing for over 50 years, and if you've been writing regularly, you're bound to produce a few books.
Right. Is there a difference between writing for children and writing for adults? Because I asked this question, I find both of them great fun, reading both, the children's books and your adult books. So, well, adult book sounds a little creepy, but you know what I mean.
Yes, no, and I agree with you. I think sometimes the transition from children's books to adult books is a very thin one. And if you look back on some of the world's great classics, some were written for adults and actually have become children's books. Books like Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, and even Treasure Island, you find perhaps that they are now often sort of listed as children's classics, whereas originally they were written for the general reader. So I think, and even I remember as a boy, by the age of 12, I was reading Dickens and the Brontes and writers who were not writing specifically for children. So it's children's books. I think when you're writing for children, for very young children, then you would perhaps adopt a different style and a different way of writing.
All right, you've also gone on record as saying that I tried to kiss the girl and she tried to kiss me and we both missed. Elaborate.
I remember.
That was your first missed kiss.
Yes, the girl that I first tried to kiss. She closed her eyes and I closed mine, and thus, worse luck, we missed.
Okay, you've also said that, if you have a lonely childhood, it makes you sensitive to the problems of other children.
I think it certainly did in my case. And when you think of some famous writers like Dickens, who had a difficult and traumatic childhood, it certainly, I think, gave him an insight into boys growing up, in his case, which resulted in books like David Copperfield and Great Expectations and Oliver Twist. And so the same with perhaps say the Bronte sisters, you can think of, Emily and Charlotte, and they're very sort of sad and tragic lives, which is often reflected in their work.
We could. There's a lovely term in Bangla. correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a bit rusty these days in my Bangla. It's called Bhajor Bhajor. Do you know what that means, right? Bhajor Bhajor means rabbiting on about something or the other. Shall we make this a little more exciting and let's find out what the children know about you over here. I've got a list of questions, and if you get it right, you get this, or you get your book autographed twice by Mr. Bond over there.
Yeah.
So,
Right. And I put your name in it too.
all right. This is all about you. I think it's a much nicer way instead of us going on about it. Right. This is for children below 16 and above 17. But try not to go for it, the above 17ers. This is primarily for kids under 16 because, well, they know Mr. Bond's book much better than you lot do. So here goes. In which Bollywood movie did Ruskin Bond appear in a cameo role, playing the role of a bishop? Mics, please. Are you under 16? No, out. Under 16. Yes, lady in the black with the red collar. Saat Khoon Maaf, is that the right answer?
That's true, yes.
Absolutely. So you get this card later, and then you can get this autographed and your book autographed, okay?
And I was so bad that they never offered me another role after that.
Right. In which novel does Ruskin Bond's popular adolescent hero Rusty appear for the first time? Yes, little boy there. Yeah, you with your hand up. Little girl up there. Yeah. Sorry, no, not you. You don't look under 16. Huh. Yeah. Just say it loud. Room on the Roof? Room on the Roof is absolutely correct. Congratulations. I think that's the right answer.
Right, my first novel, and it's 60 years exactly since it was published.
How old were you when you wrote it?
I was 17 when I wrote it. Took me 3 years to get a publisher.
Okay, now we know how old he is. And thank you so much for, taking all the trouble and coming to be with us over here.
Thank you.
Right, there's a Mr. Benegal who lives in Bombay. Which Shyam Benegal film was based on Ruskin Bond's A Flight of Pigeons? Are you under 16? No. Under 16. Under 16. Junoon is the correct answer?
Yes, and that was made in 1978, so a tough one for the under-16s to remember.
But they know it, don't they?
Yes.
How did you take this transfer from the written word to the movies?
I did nothing, actually. I've never written a story or a novel with a film in mind. So it was just by purely a coincidence that in this case the directors or those who advised them just thought these particular stories would make good films, and so they bought the film rights for me and went ahead, and in one or two cases I got involved a little, but so generally they were films based on stories I'd written. But I have never written for a film.
Okay. And did you find that they'd kind of mutilated your story beyond recognition?
No, not at all. Particularly, let's see, A Flight of Pigeons, which was Shyam Benegal filmed. He kept very close to the narrative and to the characters in the story. And since I've always written fairly realistic stories, that perhaps it makes it easier for the director. And the same with The Blue Umbrella, which Vishal Bhardwaj made. We kept fairly close to the story, and he did consult me on it too. Saat Khoon Maaf started out, in my case, with a very short story of 4 or 5 pages. And then he asked me if I'd elaborate it and turn it into a novella. Which I did, and then he based his script, or a Hindi script, on my story, and then he got another colleague into it. So that did change quite a bit in the process.
But not mutilated?
No, not mutilated, no, not at all.
Now, when you're writing for children, okay, we seem to be drifting here. When you're writing for children, do you have a particular child in mind, somewhere in the back of your head when you're writing your story? Maybe, I don't know. Perhaps I have myself as a child in mind. Yeah.
In a way. And I think a lot of writers are, in a way, writing for themselves. If they're the subjective kind of writer who's writing out of his or her own life, and you write in a very personal way. But you also have perhaps in mind, here I'm talking perhaps of an adult writer, where you visualize the ideal reader, and perhaps that reader too could be a projection of yourself.
Great. Okay, now here's one for the grown-ups. You've been so patient, you brought your kids along. Here's a question for you. Which was the first poem that Mr. Bond published in the Illustrated Weekly, you remember that, of India in 1952? No one knows this. Do you remember that?
I remember publishing a poem called Lost, I think. But I don't, I wouldn't be able to recite it because I've forgotten the words. And it's not in my collected verse either. So thank you for reminding me of it. I'll now dig it up and maybe include it somewhere.
I boarded the big ship bound for the west.
Yes.
The clean white liner in the noonday heat, coolies thronged the sun-drenched pier, yet I saw only the village I had left and a boat at rest on the river's shallow water. These are your words.
My first poem. Yes,
Right.
1952, you're right. Yes.
As a reminder, I'm going to leave this with you so that you can then...
Great, thank you. Thank you. Maybe I can make some money on it too.
Yes. I'll give you my phone number. You can send my cut.
Thank you. Yes, you're entitled to your 10%. Thank you.
Okay. Now, according to a Ruskin Bond story, kids under 16, and we'll come back to this, in which North Indian town does time stop at? Yeah. Whoa, lovely. Lovely. No, you're not 16. Yes, lady. In the white. Here, you. Huh?
Dehradun.
No, not Dehradun, not Mussoorie. Where?
That's right, yes.
Shamli, that's right. And the name of the book is?
Time stops at Shamli.
Time Stops at Shamli. Absolutely
Yes,
right.
and it hasn't started again yet either.
What is special about Shamli that you...
Well, you see, the Shamli of my story is not really the real Shamli that exists. So it's really a fictional Shamli. It just happens that it's a sheer coincidence that the name of the town is the same as that of a fairly large and thriving town in the sugarcane area of the Muzaffarnagar district.
So what exactly, I mean, how did you manage to link? There must have been a lot of little towns made into one composite Shamli.
I'm always writing about small towns, and like Deoli in the story Night Train at Deoli. But they do exist, but sometimes I get my geography wrong. I was never very good in geography, so I sort of sometimes place them in the wrong area.
Who is Naku?
I don't know either. Tell me.
All right, let me give you a hint. In a story, Naku is an unusual spectator in a cricket match who, when repeatedly hit by a ball, turns violent and all hell is let loose on the pitch. Who is Naku? Yes.
That's right. Yes. Thank you for reminding me.
See, there's a lot he doesn't know about the stuff that he writes.
Sometimes my readers know better than I do. That's true.
I must confess, it's a story I haven't read, but I have a very, very good research team backing me up on these questions.
Well, Cricket for the Crocodile. It's just being reissued in a little sort of a colored picture book for very young children. Now, this is a story I wrote for really young children. So it's short and it's sweet and it's simple. And which is why...
Around when did you write this?
I wrote it a few years back, but it's just being reissued in a new format, in a sort of colored picture books.
So can one call you a cricket fan?
Oh yes, I'm a cricket fan, but my sympathies always go out to bowlers. I feel very sorry for them, and I have this theory, but nobody takes it seriously, that the wickets should be taller and broader, so that gives the bowler a better chance. And certainly the bat remains the same, otherwise these batsmen will start having bigger bats. So the wickets must be bigger. That will, I think, make it much fairer.
And 22 fielders at least. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, he has these dreams about cricket.
But nobody ever keeps me in their cricket team for long, because I don't believe in this business of running up and down between the wickets. So if I tap the ball somewhere and the other batsman comes running towards me, I just stay where I am. So the last time I played in a team, they had 4 run-outs, and they never asked me to play again.
No, he has said, he is on record as having said that this wretched game keeps romantic youths out in the sun when they should be indoors applying balm to the foreheads of feverish young maidens. Do you remember that?
Did I write that when I was 21, I think, probably.
Your first full-fledged autobiographical book, Scenes from a Writer's Life, is where this is written. Okay. I love this. I'm telling him what he's written. I just love it. Okay. Here goes... if red roses are for young lovers, then what is for long-standing relationships? Shall I ask him, or are you going to give me the answer? No?
Stinging nettle?
Ruskin Bond's Book of Nature? No?
Red. Yes, you'll have to remind me again. Red roses for young lovers, and stinging nettle for... No,
French beans.
French beans. Right, absolutely right, French beans. Yeah, so you need someone to look after you. At least you can keep you happy and well fed.
Yeah. Any questions from kids over here? Any, all of you seem to have read. Yes. That's all right. You're allowed to ask questions, not allowed to answer them.
Forgive me if you have mentioned it in any of your books, but I'm very interested to know, like you mentioned at 17 you published your first story novel, and it took you 3 years to find a publisher. I'm very interested to know, and I'm sure that a lot of people, children and adults, are willing to ask you, how did you think that what you wrote was some material to be published, and how did you keep on for 3 years, and what would you advise young aspiring writers?
Well, advice to young and aspiring writers, and there are many of them I know, because every week at least I get either letters or I meet young people who come up to me and say, sir, I want to write a book, I want to be a writer, or I have written a book, and how do I get it published? And this was never the case, when I was just out of school. I came home and having finished school in 1950, and my mother said, well, now, Ruskin, what are you going to do with yourself? And I said, I think I'm going to be a writer, Mum. And she said, don't be silly, go and join the army. In those days, the army was actually the first choice for a young man. And now you have, of course, so many choices before you. So anyway, I didn't join the army. I was determined to be a writer. And as you say, you have to persevere. But first you have to know you can't go plunging into it. You must have and be familiar with the basics of writing. And the way to attain that is through reading books. The more you read, the better you'll write. And if you look at any well-known, successful, great writer, you will always find that he or she was a reader when young, and usually once a reader, always a reader. So it's books that make readers, and the readers make writers.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. One other question, if I'm allowed.
No, now it'll cost you. Now you'll have to pay.
How
One
much?
more, here. Yeah, come. No, here there's a mic. Take the mic.
Is any book of yours coming in 2016?
Yes, well, I'll say that my publishers have just brought out the 60th anniversary edition of The Room on the Roof with some beautiful illustrations. But of course, that's not a new book. So I am now working on a memoir, which is sort of taking some time to complete. I'm writing a mystery story. which is I mean, I'm having fun doing that. Then what else is coming out? When,
Just publish a Rusty.
oh, there's a new Rusty just out. See, I'm forgetting my new books too. Yes, it's a totally new Rusty. Although in the book Rusty is still 15 or 16 years old in the story, but I wrote it last year. It's called Rusty in the Magic Mountain, and this is different from the earlier Rusty books, which were realistic and autobiographical, in that it has a lot of fantasy in it and magic.
Well, you know, he's also working on a book for grown-ups called Rusty and the Magic Mushroom, but we won't go
All
there.
right, that's the sequel.
Any more? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Just give her a mic. Somebody rush to her quickly, please, because we're very short of time. Yeah.
So,
हाँ बोलो कहाँ हाँ बोलो
so I wanted to ask you,
Where is he there? Okay.
in one of your books, there was a story called The Playing Fields of Shimla.
Yeah.
So, you had mentioned one of your best friends, Omar, in it.
Mhm.
So, he had moved away to Pakistan after after the country was divided.
Right.
Could you tell me a little more about him?
Well, practically everything that I have to say about him is in that story, which you have read, and it is largely a true story, written, of course, from memory. And I've changed a couple of names, as you do sometimes when you write about real people. So it is a story of friendship and loss, and how loss can sometimes be brought about by events that are outside your own control. In this case, a war. No, it started with the partition of the country, and later he dies in a conflict between India and Pakistan. So again, the combatants or the people in the story are really affected by outside forces, and which sometimes happens in life, and there's nothing we can really do about it.
Are you okay with that? Or you want more stories on Omar? He'll have to go to Pakistan for
And,
that, I think.
in the story, when we're at school, we have this tunnel. We are digging a tunnel that we have this plan to run away from school and escape. And so I end the story by saying, because his plane is shot down during the war, and I remember ending the story with the line that there are no tunnels in the sky.
Yeah. You remember that? Yeah. Wow. What a lovely ending.
Yes.
What a lovely ending. Yes, please.
Very big part of what you have been doing, and how your contributions have been to literature.
Whether his siblings have been an influence on his writing, that's the question.
Not a great deal, because there was quite an age gap between me and my younger brother, who has been living in Canada for the last 50 years or more. William, and who you mentioned, and he would be about 72 now, to my 81. And so we didn't really grow up together much, because he grew up with my stepfather, and I had we had lost our father when I was 10. So our lives actually did not merge much. Once he left India when he was 16, 17, never came back. I left India and came back. So that was a difference too. My sister Ellen passed away some 2-3 years back, and she was an invalid all her life. So out of really respect for her condition, I didn't write much about her.
Yes, ma'am.
Any children writer that you were influenced by when you were growing up?
Oh yes, lots of them. I think I started out, of course, with a big book of nursery rhymes. I remember. Teacher, teacher, don't be dumb. Give me back my bubble gum. Things like that. And then I wrote one in response to that. Teacher, teacher, Please don't stare. Tarzan's lost his underwear. So, but nursery rhymes had a great influence on me, and I think they do on most of us. Then, of course, there was Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, and then I grew older, and there would
Those were really grown-up books, weren't they?
Well, yeah, I went straight into these books. Yes, Alice in Wonderland is really a grown-up book, come to think of it. Though I read it as a child, and because I read it now too, so that it somehow it can see there's another classic which can can be read at any age.
Yeah. Lady in the pink shirt, yeah.
Where is the fine line between writing for children, writing for grown-ups, especially when you're using elements of fantasy, magic, etc.?
You can't really draw a straight line right down. It depends so much on the reader, on your own development as a child. Some of us go into adult books at a very young age. And others, well, never go into them. So it makes it very difficult for a writer to write for a specific age group. And yet publishers do make this, what I think is a mistake, in that they often publish books and say, this book is for 8-year-olds, and this is for 10-year-olds, and this is for 12-year-olds. You can't really pin it down like that, because children develop at a different rate, I'm sure. Sometimes you're mature at 10, 11, and sometimes you don't mature at all. So
let's do a little experiment here. How many of you have children, more than 2 children? Can I see your hands? How many of you have more than 2 children? This is a very well-disciplined crowd, right?
Yeah, well,
I mean, amazing. That's all right. Then my experiment doesn't work. Okay. No, you're talking earlier on about the fact that you changed names of your characters. I have to share this experience with you, because I just published a book a couple of years ago, and they were based on, I forgot to change their names.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yes.
and one of the survivors of these, one of the offspring of these, he said, "You're very lucky, because every name I followed up, there is this uncle, but they're all dead, so you're very lucky." I could have got into trouble with that. Yes, sir.
And sometimes you change a name, and then somebody else will come and claim that name is his, the fictional name. So you have to. It's tricky too.
Yeah, boy, the check shirt.
You had written a book called you had written a story, He Said It with Arsenic,
Yes.
where one of your uncles tried to poison you. Is it true?
Not this particular uncle, no. No, that story is fiction, but I do often write about relatives. You see, when I run out of ideas, sometimes I fall back on uncles and aunts, and when I run out of relatives, I'll write about animals. When I run out of animals, I write ghost stories. You can always cook up a ghost or two.
So relatives are quite high on your hierarchy. I would have put them after ghosts, actually. Yes, the young lady in the yellow shirt.
I am Anvesha. I would like to ask you which of the books do you like the most, in which you have written in the past years, and why so?
Well, that's a difficult one, because when you're actually into writing a book or a story, and you as the writer are enjoying it, then that particular one is your favorite. It's the one you like the most. And later on, when you're writing something else, you may lose your enthusiasm for the earlier one. So it's really, I think, difficult to have a favorite. But maybe I still have a soft spot for my first novel, The Room on the Roof, because I was so young, and it's a story about adolescence, written by an adolescent, and which is probably what makes it a bit different.
Yes.
Is it true that you had an unemployed or something husband called Kev?
that I'm an unemployed eccentric uncle. No, I have been.
Did you-
Please ask that question loudly.
Did you have an unemployed eccentric uncle called Ken?
Yes, I did. Uncle Ken was real. The trouble is, you see, when I first wrote about him, I didn't realize he would become a popular character. So then readers or young readers said, give us another Uncle Ken story. So then I had to start making them up. So they're really fictitious stories, but the character is true to life.
Yes, the lady with the fancy dark glasses there. Yes, come. No, don't take them off. Yeah.
Let's see them.
Did your grandfather actually have a private zoo?
Back in those days, you know, when I was a small boy, 1940s, if you were lucky, I mean, there were still houses with fairly large gardens and compounds, and if you wanted to keep pets and animals, you could do so. Which nowadays it's very difficult because most of us live in flats or apartment buildings, so it's really so I wouldn't recommend that you start keeping pet pythons or a mongoose or or a muskrat or anything in your house.
Yes, the lady. Yeah, you. Yeah, just give her the mic, please. We'll come to you, ma'am. We'll come to you.
Good afternoon, sir. And I'm a big fan of your writing. I just wanted to know, have you ever faced writer's block?
It's strange, I'm always asked this question. Wherever I go, somebody or other is going to ask me if I've ever faced writer's block. I think it's probably because you face it when you're doing an exam and you're stuck halfway through your question paper. And you can't do what I do, which is to just crumple up the page on which I'm writing and put in the waste paper basket. But that's one way of dealing with it. Tear up what you're writing and do something else, or put it aside if you're stuck in a story or a book. Put it aside for some time, do something else, write something different, and come back to it later. You know, that might help.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So, I don't know if I am touching on a sore nerve over here, but what happened to the classmate who flushed down your room on the roof manuscript, and what are your feelings back then?
What was the question, sir?
What happened to that poor fellow who flushed your room on the roof manuscript down the toilet?
No, nobody flushed me down the toilet.
There you go.
No, the manuscript, not you.
No.
Charming.
I'm still here, like Alice in Wonderland. I went down the rabbit hole and came out at the other end. But no, it wasn't the room on the roof that was flushed down. It was when I was in boarding school and I wrote a skit about one of my teachers, and he discovered it in my desk. And he then tore it up, and I don't know what he did with it. So my only advice to all of you who go to school is, if you want to write, I encourage you to do so, but keep your teachers out of it. Don't put them into your stories. It's better off.
Okay, at the back, that young lady there. Yeah, extreme right. Somebody rush, please. Thank you.
Sir, I just wanted to ask you, what were your relatives' reaction about the stories that you wrote about them? How did they react to your stories?
They didn't, because I waited till they were all dead.
Yes, ma'am. Somebody there else wants to ask a question in your neighborhood. Yeah, ukhani thako, ukhani. Oi, kache. Okay, yeah. Lady with the red dupatta.
Lal dupatta. Mal ke.
So I wanted to ask you that regarding child's imagination, do you think that it has changed during this course of time?
Where is she?
There she is. There.
Yes.
Do you think that it has changed during this course of time from your time to our generation because of this technology outburst?
Yes, you're true. We are now heavily into technology, but I don't think human nature has changed much. And as far as the imagination goes, it shouldn't affect it. But we'll wait and see.
But sir, the nature means the impact on children about nature, it's quite going down recently because of this technology outburst, which is completely taking over the entire generation right now.
In some ways you're right, but let me also say that children, even adults, over the years, over the centuries, have never been very interested in nature. And it's only the unusual or the someone who's gotten out of the way interest in various things who might become a nature lover. We are not all nature lovers and never have been. Man and nature are actually directly opposed to each other in many ways.
Yeah, can I have the mic here, please, in this area? The lady, first row there, yeah. And then pass it behind you after that.
Mr. Bond, can you tell us something about the adopted family of yours, or rather the one that has adopted you, as you say?
You'll have to wait for my memoir now because it's all there. And it'll take too long really to go into it just now.
He's adopted the world, so
yes.
Or the world has adopted him.
That's
either
right.
way.
So, would you rather live in one of your stories like Fosterganj or being out in the reality where, like in Fosterganj, you wouldn't have to come to a literary meet and talk to a crowd?
Charming. What happened to me?
Okay. So, where would you rather live?
Well, I have lived in Fosterganj, and we never had literary meets up till about 10 years ago. This is a very recent phenomenon, isn't it? As older people will know. I grew up in a world where and in India, where we never had book fairs, we never had literary festivals, book launches, this sort of thing. You wasn't there. You just, if you were a writer and you wrote a book, you did your best to get it published, and then you went to bookshops and hoped that you'd find it on a shelf. And we can finish. I can tell you how one of my early books was published. Like any young writer, I went into a bookshop hoping to see my book there, and of course I couldn't at first. Then I saw it right at the bottom of a pile of best-selling authors. So I looked around. Was the shop owner looking? I thought he wasn't. So I pulled it out from under the pile and put it on top, hoping it would be noticed there, of course. But the shop owner had seen me, so he walked across. He didn't know I was the author. He walked across, picked up my book, looked at it and said, "Ye ne chalta. This isn't selling." And he put it back under the under the pile. So just to teach him a lesson, I bought it. So sometimes authors are reduced to buying their own books.
Okay, can somebody rush across to that young man there? Yeah. Or this young girl here? Yeah, please.
That's so nice of you, but I'm 50 and I have young girls for kids.
Why are you asking questions?
My day is made because you just said that. No, that apart, jokes apart. I think, Mr. Bond, the best thing about your books are those one-liners. Like my personal favorite is the one from Cherry Tree. Probably you don't even remember. There's this small boy and he plants a cherry tree. I mean, he actually plants a seed and then he watches with his grandfather this tree blossoming.
Yes.
And then they both look up, and when it blossoms, they think within themselves what it must be like to be God. You know, that's one of my favorite lines from your books. And why I'm saying this is, that is where I feel, you know, your books are, they transcend beyond being children books, or I mean, they're universal.
Yeah, that's what the point I was trying to make earlier on. Yeah,
right.
You know, children writing for children and writing for.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you know that last line that you mentioned that you liked. The first publisher I gave this cherry tree to cut it out and said, no, you can't have a boy comparing himself to God. And so the edition that was published in America is without that line. But when it was published in India, I put it back. I put that line back. What does it feel like to be God?
But he didn't say say he wanted to be God. He was just imagining
No,
what
he was
it would be
imagining
like.
that having grown this tree from a seed and watched it grow
It's wonderful.
and give flowers and then fruit, and it's the little boy in it is Rakesh, my adopted grandson, who somebody else asked about, and who's here, who brought me to Calcutta.
And that's a particular.
So he's also seen me
Thank
grow not like a cherry tree, but like a banyan tree, I'm afraid.
The young lady, I'm not making that mistake again, the young lady with the black jacket and red collar.
I've been waiting for a long time. Sir, how did you cope up with criticism back then, and if you face it now, how do you cope with it?
Criticism. Well, I didn't get. I got some encouraging criticism and reviews. The only one I remember was the only nasty remark I got when I was after The Room on the Roof was published in England was one critic wrote and said, "Ruskin Bond writes Babu English." So you have to be prepared for sometimes for a certain amount of criticism. And just shrug it off and get on with your work. There will always be critics, and we need them too.
There, the lady with the grey sweater, yeah. And then just pass it on to the guy behind you.
Good afternoon, sir. I would like to ask, as a writer, what do you think a good book which is meant for children should be able to do? Should it be able to trigger their imagination or teach them the much needed values in today's world, such as tolerance, secularism, equality? It should be more imaginative or should be more informative?
Well, if it's a work of fiction, then it would have to be imaginative in order to be effective, in order to help you to read it. But you can always weave into your story. If you want to give a message to the world, by all means. But don't make it too obvious, because that would rather put the reader off. So you must do it in a fairly subtle way, through your characters, through the incidents of your story. And the world has always been a world full of intolerance. So all I can say is that if you're tolerant, and you are tolerant towards others, they will be tolerant towards you. So tolerance, just as intolerance breeds intolerance, so tolerance will also breed tolerance. So I think that's what we should do about it. Thank you.
Actually, I can live with intolerance. It's inhumanity that kills me every time, Yes, the young man with the blazer.
Were the characters in the Rusty series real?
The actors were real. I'm afraid some of them were maybe not suited to the roles that they were given, but they were based loosely on my stories, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Lady with the check shirt here.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on Ruskin Bond the poet, because we get to hear of or maybe know him a little less than Ruskin Bond the author. So is your poetry writing like more deliberate or spontaneous? Who were your inspirations growing up while writing verse?
Should I read them a poem? I have one.
Yeah, well, great. Mr. Bond is going to read one of his poems.
I happen to have some of my poems here, so I'll read one out. Woody Allen glasses.
He's going to need his Woody Allen glasses. While he's looking for them, do you need a pair of glasses to look for them? No, I'm just checking. I remember the first time I met Ruskin Bond was in Missouri, and we were walking on one of those paths, and he won't remember this. He was sitting on a parapet in front of his house, and everybody I was with knew him. I didn't. And I just said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm waiting for the mountain to shift." That was my introduction to Ruskin Bond. Yeah, please.
I do now. It's coming back to me. But because it was so long ago, and
it was 30 years ago. Please don't even. I remember it. I don't expect you to remember it.
So do you want a serious poem or a funny one?
Both.
Oh, right. I'll just read a couple. Pardon? Which one did she say?
I don't know. Which one? Time, if it's in this volume.
Time. Time now. Well, I'll do the funny one first. I hope it's funny anyway. It's called The Demon Driver. At driving a car, I've never been good. I batter the bumper and damage the hood. Get off the road, the traffic cops shout. You're supposed to go round that roundabout. I thought it was quicker to drive straight through. No, give us your license. It's time to renew. I took their advice and handed a fee to a babu who looked on this windfall with glee. No problem, he said. Your license now pakka. You can drive all the way from here to Kolkata. So away I drove at a feverish pitch, advancing some way down an unseen ditch. Once back on the highway, it's a little bit long, so I don't know it by heart. Once back on the highway, I soon joined the fray of hundreds of drivers who wouldn't give way. I skimmed past a truck and revolved round a van. Good drivers can do anything that he can. Then offered a lift to a man with a load. Just a little way down to the end of the road, he asked. As I pressed on the pedal, the car gave a shudder. He'd got in at one door, got out at the other. God help you, he said as he hurried away. I'll come for a drive another fine day. I came to that roundabout. Round it I sped, eager to get to my dinner and bed. Round it I went and round it once more. Get off the road, that cop was a bore. I swung to the left and went clean through a wall. My neighbor stood there, he looked menacing, tall. This will cost you 3,000, he quietly said, and send me your check before you're in bed. Alas, my new car was sent for repair. But my friends gathered round and said, never despair. We're all going to help you to make a fresh start. And next day, they gave me a nice bullock cart.
This reminds me of my driving experiences. I don't have a license, so, you know.
You don't have a license.
But nowadays, if you walk on the streets where you're looking for a thing, if somebody offers you a lift, especially in Calcutta, if somebody's driving past, they say, would you like a lift? I say, nahi yaar, main jaldi mein hu yaar. You know, don't worry. And I keep walking.
I'll do a short one. Raindrop. This leaf, so complete in itself, is only part of a tree. And this tree, so complete in itself, is only part of the mountain. And the mountain runs down to the sea. And the sea, so complete in itself, rests like a raindrop on the hand of God.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Really. One more.
One more then.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read this one at the end. And as we part, the day is done, it's time to sleep, and with this world to make my peace. Enchanted days have all my life brought beauty more than bitter strife. May you, who read these words today, be blessed in every way. And as we part, I give you all that lies within my heart.
Beautiful. Beautiful, absolutely marvelous. Any more questions? You know, normally by now there are people signaling to get the hell off the stage. I'm so happy they aren't. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am. Right, there's no age restrictions now.
No, I can't find it. Here?
First group when my child was very young, around like...
It's not on. It's not on.
Hi, Ruskin Bond. When my son was around class, he was in class 1 and he was not fond of books. And teacher used to tell me that he is very intelligent but he needs to read the books. So I took him in the library, and I went to the story crossword book stall And the first book, I told him, you read any book, whichever you like, you just take out one book, I'll buy for you, and then you start reading it. The first book he took was Room on the Roof. And from that book, he read mostly all your books. And he started reading it, and now he's very fond of reading. Every night.
Is he here?
Yeah.
Where? Hi, why don't you ask a question? Your mom's boring. Your mom's very boring. You ask a question.
She's giving a nice
I'm giving
introduction.
my experience,
yes,
from So I'm giving a lot of thanks to Ruskin Bond that from your book, he started reading it, and now at night, without reading, he can't sleep.
Marvelous.
So all your books
Marvelous.
are very good and very inspiration to me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
And that makes it worthwhile for me. It's good. It's so good to know.
Thank you. And he had done a sketch of yours also. Last year he got a project on Ruskin Bond. So he wrote all of your books and he got the highest marks in his class.
Terrific. Terrific. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, sir. It's an absolute honor to be able to be in your presence. I have two questions. One is a little personal and one related to your writing. I'll do the writing one first. When you interact with readers from today's generation, do you get many of them pointing out any, holes in your stories? Because today's generation is so much more critical and analytical, and they have so much more access to quick information. So
yes, no, that not in that sense, but I do get criticism, especially from youngsters, because they are. There was this little girl who must have been 9 or 10, and she said, "Sir, I like your ghost stories, but they're not scary enough." She says, "Can't you make them more frightening?"
that sounds like me. So the other question I have, and I don't know if you, have ever considered this. Have you ever been tempted to introduce yourself as the name is Bond, Ruskin Bond?
You see, people confuse all these bonds. I had a great granduncle called Bond, and he, back in the early 19th century, met a gentleman called Mr. Brooke, and together they started a tea industry, and it's called Brooke Bond. So, which is far more interesting than the James Bond that you get on the screen. But I did have an uncle called James, and he was a dentist. He wasn't a secret agent. And he lies in the old Missouri cemetery, and I wrote an epitaph for him, which goes, "Stranger, approach this spot with gravity. James Bond is filling his last cavity." He's a dentist.
Well, that's a great note to end this session on. I'm so sorry we actually have run out of time now. What can I say except that you guys have been absolutely marvelous, and Mr. Bond, I hope you've enjoyed yourself as much as we have doing this.
Thank you, certainly.
And Miss Moneypenny, have you handed the mic back? Yes, marvelous. Okay, thank you very much, and autographs will be signed in the tent over there, only if you bought the books.